Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel Kalanati. Today I'm going to be talking about the short fiction I read in September. It's been quite a while since I did a video like this because I pretty much stopped reading short fiction after March this year, but this past month I got back on that horse and I've been reading a lot. I read 83 short stories from various magazines in September, and I'm not going to talk about them all. I will only talk about the highlights that were my favorites or that really stuck with me. I do apologize if I'm looking down at my phone a lot in this video. I usually try not to do that, but I have a lot of stuff to cover and I don't have it all memorized, and I'm also trying to do this fast so that my neighbors don't interrupt me once again. So in September, I read 3 issues of Uncanny magazine, issues 16, 17, and 18, which were the May through October issues. I read 2 issues of Clarkesworld, 122, which was November 2016, and 132, which was September 2017. And I read 5 issues of Lightspeed magazine, 184 through 188, which is May through September 2017. And I read 1 issue of Saab, which is a quarterly magazine in translation, but I'm not going to be talking about that here because I plan to read the 3rd issue very soon because it came out at the end of September, and I'm going to do a video just on those Saab issues because I did a video on the 1st issue back during April for Vita. I'll start off with my favorite stories from Uncanny magazine. The first is Sun, Moon, Dust by Ursula Vernon, which is about a young man, a farmer, who inherits a sword from his grandmother. The sword turns out to contain the spirits of 3 warriors who think that he is going to go off and fight, but no, he's really attached to being a farmer and he's not going to leave his land, and they get a choice between staying and doing whatever they want with him or going back into the sword. This isn't my favorite thing I've read by Vernon, but I really like that a lot of her stories feature pretty ordinary people with ordinary lives who don't necessarily want to go off and be soldiers and have grand adventures. They're the types of people that enjoy gardening and farming and having dirt on their hands, and that is a welcome change from a lot of the, let's say, stereotypical elements and character types in a lot of fantasy. Next up is A Nest of Ghosts, A House of Birds by Kat Howard. This is about a woman who inherits her grandmother's house, and I think her grandmother's will stipulates that she has to live in the house for 1 year before she can sell it or do something else with it. So she goes to live there against the advice of her mother, who did not get along with her grandmother very well, and when she arrives, she discovers the house is full of birds that she can see that apparently her grandmother could see, but her mother couldn't. And the birds may be ghosts or people's spirits. I really enjoy how Kat Howard melds fantastical elements with contemporary settings. It's not always my favorite type of fantasy, but for some reason, the stories that Howard has published in Uncanny magazine along these lines have really worked for me, and I just enjoyed like the vibe of this story. Next is The Ache of Home by Maurice Broaddus. I think I really enjoyed this story because it incorporates the problem of food deserts in urban areas with community organizations and the problem of gentrification of poor areas and such. I think it's also a story that really invites the reader to look beyond the stereotypes they might see of people who live in the hood or in the ghetto, that those people have the best interests of their communities at heart as well. They want to better where they live, and they may also have magic and ways of defending themselves too. I liked how the magic was used here. It wasn't heavily defined or described, but it seemed to naturally come out of the story. It just worked and it made sense. Sometimes I think that magic should be described more in stories. Sometimes I think you should pull back and just let it do its own thing without, spoon feeding it to the reader. And Broaddus hit the right way of incorporating it in the story where it just really worked for me. One of my favorites of the month was The Worshipful Society of Glovers by Mary Robinette Kowal. This is about a magical glove maker's apprentice who wants to make gloves to help his sister's epilepsy. And the choices he makes, the deals that he gives into in this, such a painful end, but the reason why he's doing it all, is it worth it or not? Should he have done those things or not? was a really good read. The last one from Uncanny that I want to mention is kind of an odd one that I'm not actually sure if I liked it that much or not, but I really enjoyed figuring it out, and that is Henosis by N.K. Jemisin. My recommendation for this is to go read up on what Henosis is first, because it's an actual thing, and it describes the way that the story is structured. The story is chunked into numbered parts that are out of order, and so you read the story out of order and you have to put it together and then figure out what's going on from that. And it all has to do with what Henosis is. The story, I think, is about basically deification of the author, putting authors up on pedestals and giving them awards. There's this author in the story who is nominated for a prestigious award, which he's been up for before, and this fan kidnaps him, either wants him to win or doesn't want him to win, because I think if you win this particular award, you literally get ripped to pieces or something. Like your body is a relic because you're a famous author or something. It's difficult to understand, but it could be seen perhaps as commentary on a lot of awards controversies in recent years, and that makes it really interesting. Now on to my favorite stories from Clarkesworld. The first one is Follow the White Line by Barber. This is about a ship's AI who contacts a young or inexperienced crew member in order to right a past wrong, or possibly just to complicate the present. I'm not exactly sure, but I really enjoyed it. Another one that I really enjoyed is a reprint, Reef by Paul McAuley. Admittedly, I'm forgetting the plot of this one quite a bit, but I really enjoyed it for the hard science fiction aspects, which have kind of a biological twist on them, which is something I really like McAuley for. So what I recall of the story is that it's about scientists who are researching these space-hardy organisms in a rift, like in a large asteroid. There's some really interesting possibilities with this, because when you have organisms that can exist, survive, propagate in such an extremely cold environment, that is very interesting. So yeah, I enjoyed this one for the setting, even if I don't remember the plot very well. The Secret Life of Bots by Suzanne Palmer. I enjoyed this one because it felt a little bit funny and cutesy despite the deadly circumstances. It's about a little outdated bot on the last human spaceship. The spaceship is headed out to confront an enemy alien that is on its way to destroy Earth. There's a very, very little chance they're going to succeed in stopping this alien, but the little bots might come up with a plan to save the day. This reminded me a little bit of those episodes of Star Trek series which focused on the ordinary crew members, like almost like that behind the scenes feel, where you get a completely different look at the mission of the ship and how the crew members see the main cast, which are the officers and such. But in this case, it's the little bots who are running around trying to fix the quickly falling apart ship, or going after the rodent pest problem, which was really amusing. And the last one from Clarkesworld that I really enjoyed, another one of my favorites of the month, was Pan-Humanism, Hope and Pragmatics by Jess, Barber and Sara Saab. Now, this one has kind of a weird title. I think it's a little dry and off-putting. It sounds like the title of a research paper or something, which it might be intended to be, but this had a really good emotional core. It's about two friends who are clearly destined to be together, but are always kept apart by their chosen professions and careers. They're just never in the same place at the same time long enough for something to blossom, even though they're so attracted to each other. So I really enjoyed that story. The will they ever be together, or are they just going to be good friends separated by long distance? But I also really liked the background details, particularly in their careers, the type of projects they're involved in, things like water reclamation in deserts and such, which tell you something about the state the world is in, climate change, and things like that. Never described in a lot of detail, but still in the broad strokes very interesting. So a good emotional story with well thought out things going on in the background. So definitely recommend it if you can get past the title. I read more issues of Lightspeed than anything else this past month, so you know there are going to be a ton of stories for me to mention from there. The first one is Blue Ribbon by Marissa K. Lingen. Now, I think I've read some of her stories in the past, and the one that I remembered the most was like this one about family in space. That must be something that Lingen writes about that I really enjoy. So Blue Ribbon is about a teenager and her younger sister who have just won a spaceship race, like in their 4-H club, and they and a bunch of other kids in their spaceships are getting ready to go back to the station when they discover that the station's been put down in lockdown and quarantine because some like plague is loose. So they are stuck outside of the station in their ships, unable to contact anybody, unable to get anywhere for help because space is vast. And so they have to help each other as much as they can while also maintaining their own quarantine because they don't know if any of them are sick and are going to die before help can come. This was actually a pretty heartwarming story because it felt like it was about kids helping each other out, the resourcefulness of children, but also how they help each other and their siblings and such. But heartwarming despite the fact that a lot of people die and a lot of these kids end up to be orphans. I would really recommend it. I would need to read more by Lingen. Probably my favorite story of the entire month was Near Zennor by Elizabeth Hand. This is one of the novella reprints that isn't available for free online, but if you can get your hands on it somewhere, like buy this issue or something, do it. It's so good, especially to read in October near Halloween because it's actually a kind of scary story. This is about a man whose wife has recently died. He's wrapping up their affairs, selling the house, and he goes back to Britain, to England, to visit a place where his wife has spent some time as a teenager where a very strange event happened with her and some of her friends. She never told him about this, but he discovers some letters she wrote about it and then goes to ask her friends what happened. And when he goes there, and everything seems so normal and yet also kind of eerie, it was so good. This story was pitch perfect for me in the pace, in the tone, how quiet and eerie it felt. There's no jump out and scare you moments, but it's the implied horror, especially with the end, that I really liked. It gave me chills. I read it late at night when I probably shouldn't have, but it was really, really good. A story that isn't a reprint for once, Ink by Bruce McAllister. This is about a young American boy with hemophilia who is living in an Italian village for a while. He's taken up the local boy's fad of collecting stamps, and he goes to an elderly neighbor's house to ask if she has any stamps to give him. She does. She gives him a stack of postcards, and they have a wonderful impact on his life, which he doesn't realize why until he's an adult. This felt like a kind act, a good deed from one stranger to another that came out of a really horrible event from the past, from World War II, and I really liked that. Sometimes I get tired of reading the stories that just feel like a gut punch with bad things happening, but this was definitely about a good deed. Another reprint, Acres of Perhaps by Will Ludwigsen. This is about two writers from a very old defunct science fiction anthology TV series who meet up again. It's mostly about the really strange kind of possibly horror thing that happened to one of the writers during the time that the show was on the air. And whether it happened the way that they remember it, did it really have those fantastical overtones, or was it quite an ordinary event that just seemed much more because of the context? I mean, they were working on a science fiction TV series. I enjoyed the retrospective feel. It was just a novel idea that I really enjoyed. I am very inclined to enjoy anything that Pat Murphy writes, so it's no surprise that I really enjoyed her newest short story, which is called Crossing the Threshold. This one I just thought was a simple but well-told story that brings together a couple of interesting elements. It's about a woman who is trying to clear out her father's house. He's passed away and left her with a whole bunch of things from his years as a professor, traveling around the world, collecting various artifacts. and she gets the help of a local San Franciscan witch to help her clean the stuff out, find out what has value, get rid of it, barter it away and stuff. And she's also worried that she may have invited the devil or some sort of force across the threshold, not necessarily into her house, but maybe into the world, and she wants to do something to negate this action. I think that that aspect of the thing that she may have let into the world wasn't talked about enough in the story, but I did like the rather prosaic feel to it. Like, this is what ordinary people would do. If you thought you might have done something bad and you just happened to have the help of a local witch, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to just do it. Like, it couldn't hurt anything, right? So that's what I really enjoyed about this one. Another novella reprint that I really enjoyed is Isuel's Lexicon by Yoon-Ha Lee. I haven't read much of Yoon-Ha Lee's outright fantasy. I've mostly read his more science fictional stories, though I think there is actually magic in the Machineries of War novel series, now that I think about it. But this is definitely fantasy and war with magic and a fantasy world. And it kind of asks the question, can you destroy a people by destroying their language? Especially if they use language as magic. I thought the entire thing was very strong. I really enjoyed the idea of language as magic. It's just a thing that I really, really like. But I also thought this had an extremely solid ending. I think there's a tendency in short fiction for there to be a really wonderful beginning, a magnificent build-up, and then a really craptastic ending because it's too abrupt or it goes on too long and you're like, you should have just ended this paragraphs ago. This just ended right when it should have. It wasn't about an entire war, it was about one aspect of it and one part of the magical aspect of the world as well. So highly recommended. The Lightspeed novella reprints were really great in the past few months. And now we come to the last story, which might be the most controversial one, and that is Wealalaleia by Amal El-Motar. This is a reprint, and I would swear that I had heard it won an award or something in the past. Maybe it hasn't. I was surprised after I read this to find so many negative reviews of it online, but I think it's because it doesn't really have a plot. It is about an abstract concept basically, and it's written very much like an encyclopedia entry on these invisible organisms that can lodge in people's throats. They feed off of people's grief and they release this sound, the Wealalaleia sound, and then cause the person to have a feeling of like euphoria. So in a way, they can be treated kind of like a drug. They have a mutually beneficial relationship with people, but when people start to forget the traditions and to forget how this relationship actually works, they abuse it and it doesn't work so well anymore. So I think the story is about grief, about expressing grief and the different cultural traditions around the world of expressing emotions, of grieving, of mourning, and where those might come from, but also if you don't know how something works, if you don't remember where the tradition came from, it might not work for you because you start doing it wrong. So that's what I really liked about it. I think that El-Motar has always done a beautiful job of writing about abstract concepts, about emotions in a way that I really feel it. So while I like there to be plots in my stories, there are some things like this story, some of like Sofia Samatar's stories, which are kind of similar to this one, that I really like because they manage that so well. So I would recommend it, but it seems a lot of other people have bounced off this story really hard. So those are all of my favorite stories that I read in September. Like I said before, I'll be talking about the second and third issues of Samovar in a separate video, so look forward to that. And if you have read any of these stories, any of these magazine issues, and you want to discuss them, please leave me a comment down below because I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon in my next video, and until then, bye.